Okay, let's dive in. Welcome to the second information session for the 2026 McKnight Composer Fellowships through the American Composers Forum. Before I introduce myself and my colleague Dell, I want to remind you to please keep your microphones off until the Q&A portion of the session, and a reminder that the session will be recorded to be posted on the ACF website for future reference for you to return to or for others to watch who weren't able to make it this evening. So that reminder having been given, I'd like to introduce myself and also my colleague Dell. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see our actual faces here. There we go. My name is Brian. I'm the community director here at the American Composers Forum. I oversee our McKnight Fellowships and Composers in Residence programs and other programs that support Minnesota music creators. And I'll pass it off to Dell. Dell, would you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Brian. Hello, everyone. My name is Del Paulson. I use any and all pronouns, and I am ACF's advocacy manager. I've been with ACF for about 5.5 years. I help manage our individual giving and am developing ACF's advocacy initiatives, which we are hoping to roll out in about a year or so. Great to be here. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you, Dell. Okay, well, let's go ahead and dive in. I'll share my screen again. So as with last night, a reminder that as we go along, Dell and I will keep an eye on the chat. Go ahead and put whatever questions you have into the chat. If we have time, we'll answer them as we go. And then whatever we haven't answered by the end of the slideshow, we'll go ahead and go back to those. So putting them in the chat will help us to track and be sure we don't lose any of your queries. So thanks for doing that. So we went over some of this last night. We'll very briefly recap the sort of big picture of what the Artist and Culture Bearer Fellowships are, and what the sort of core criteria are for awardees. So the intent of the McKnight Artist and Culture Bearer Fellowships is to recognize and support artists and culture bearers who are beyond emerging and have sustained experience in their area of practice. Fellows demonstrate achievement, commitment, and high-level proficiency in artistic and/or culture bearer practice that contributes to their field and impacts and benefits people in Minnesota. The addition of culture bearer acknowledges that the McKnight programs support creative leaders in Minnesota from cultures that don't use the word artist, such as Native American and Hmong cultures, as well as those who center the transmission and preservation of cultural lifeways. A quick reminder for those who weren't here last night, if you don't already know, the McKnight Foundation is a philanthropic organization that gives funds to various organizations, including the American Composers Forum, to then funnel to artists, such as our Composer Fellows. We are one of a number of partner organizations that are funded by the McKnight Foundation and offer these fellowships to artists. So here are the key evaluation criteria that your applications will be evaluated by. The two big buckets are artistic craft and the definition of the applicant as being beyond early practice. So under artistic craft, our panel will be looking for a strong sense of the creator's voice, for the technical proficiency necessary to achieve the artist's desired results, and for the quality of the work samples themselves. Again, as we talked about last night, technical proficiency and quality of work are always defined within the social and aesthetic context of the particular music creator's area of practice. The panelists will also be looking to ensure that the applicant has clearly reached beyond early practice, as evidenced by having a significant body of work, creative achievement, and sustained contribution to their artistic field and to Minnesota's arts ecosystem. An important note is that ACF staff members do not contribute to decision-making or the selection of awardees beyond the pre-screening of applications for eligibility and completeness. The selection of awardees is all done by our panel of 4 music creators, the 4 folks that we met, well, not in person, but that we learned about last night. And for those of you who weren't here last night, the last night's info session recording will be posted later this week on the website. So you will get to know our specific panelists and some direct quotes about what they are looking for in successful applications. So be sure to go back and watch that if you weren't with us last night. This is an overview of what the selection process looks like. Again, we'll go through this relatively quickly since it's a recap. First, ACF staff will pre-screen applications for eligibility and completeness and support the panel as they work through the applications to ensure they're adhering to the guidelines and the values of ACF and the McKnight Foundation. Again, ACF staff does not contribute to selection of fellows. The panel is made up of 4 music creators who review the applications in 2 phases. The first is where all the applications go to each panelist individually in a randomized order, and they review all of the applications and score them. The second phase is a group review where all the panelists get together and review the applications collectively, during which time the scoring that individual panelists have given to specific applications can be revised based on the conversation between the panelists. So now we will jump into the core content of your application before we then take a look at some application materials from successful past applicants. As we do that, I'm going to remember, oops, go back. I'm going to remember to pull up the chat here. There we go, so I can be sure to see things. Okay. So the sort of lead of your application is your artist statement. This can be done in a written form or over video. We've had successful fellows do both of those things. Whatever format feels most comfortable for you and allows you to speak most clearly and powerfully to your work. The content of the artist statement can take any of several directions at your discretion. It may include information about your background, the development of your work over time, your interest as an artist, or your specific aesthetic position, your future artistic direction, or any other information you would like to present to the panel. You'll note that the artist statement and some of the other parts of the application are very flexible in terms of the applicant having agency to include the information in a way that best represents them as an artist and their work. So the artist statement is similarly flexible. The work samples are the core of your application, and each of them is accompanied by a written description. It's important to know that the panelists are only required to listen to the first work sample, and that is what they will base their initial scores of your application on. So this one makes the most critical impression on the panelists and should represent your most distinctive and compelling musical example. Also be sure to choose a sample that connects directly to your artist statement that we just discussed, and a sample that demonstrates the particular demonstrate the particular significance of this work sample with an additional written description. You will also be asked to submit a second work sample, and you will have the option to submit a third. These should complement your first work sample by showing the depth and breadth of your practice, perhaps offering a point of contrast. If you are someone who writes purely instrumental music, but also does some interdisciplinary work such as stage productions, or maybe you have some music that's through composed and some improvised, some that's more in one style and some that's another. The second and third work samples are an opportunity um, to show those contrasting and complementary styles and approaches. So choose something that demonstrates the depth and breadth of your practice. So we're going to now dive into the four previous fellows and the content of their applications. I'm just going to be sure I've got my notes lined up before we go. Okay, this is Queen Drea, who was a 2022 McKnight Fellow. I included just a little excerpt from each of these folks' artist statement that I felt kind of tied together their unique voice in those statements. I enjoy being in the uncomfortable space. If my compositions invoke visceral responses in the listener, then I've done my job. I'm going to go ahead and let you take a moment to read this statement on your own, and then we'll circle back and talk about a few key points. So go ahead and take a couple minutes to do that. Okay, hopefully that gave you enough time. If you are like me and a slow reader, know that I will be reading it on my end to hopefully give you plenty of time. But I'll also leave it up here while we hit a few key points. Um, so, uh, one note before we go on, you'll see some ellipses, some dots at the end of various paragraphs. These are not the totality of the artist statements. These are selections from them that sort of highlight the key components and individuality of each of these statements. So that having been said, so Queen starts off with her general aesthetics and sounds and the relationship of her music to the listener. These visceral responses and discomfort that she's looking to evoke. In the second paragraph, she talks about her artistic background and the long-term development of her artistic identity, giving panelists a context for how she got to where she is now and the materials that she's submitting now. In the third paragraph, she talks in more detail about her creative materials and her creative processes, which gives some really tangible context to the actual samples that the panelists are going to listen to. And finally, she talks about current and future developments in her artistic practice and process. So together, these all give a sort of a sense of individuality of the person behind the music that the panelists are listening to, a sense of their history as an artist and how they see their own development, and a sense of the very specific aesthetic tools and materials that they use in their practice. So we are gonna, I'll let y'all read this written description, and then we're gonna go straight into playing this work sample, just a piece of it. And after we watch and listen to that, then we'll circle back to the key points from this work sample. So go ahead and have a read. Okay, after we listen, I'll say something about the third paragraph here, the 1 minute and 23-second track that Queen has included as the score. But first, let's just go ahead and have a watch at GTFOH. Okay, now we're going to listen to Queen Andrea's sample. Okay. So obviously we don't have time to listen to all of the excerpts, but hopefully that gives you a sense of the work sample itself and how it relates to this written description. A few key points about the description that Queen has included. You'll note that she has included a cue time, and it looks like I added a number to that. It should say 3:42. You should definitely always include start and end times. It will need to be less than 5 minutes, which is why that's a mistake, and should say 3:42, not 3:34:32. In any case, the cue times are critical for your panelists to know exactly where to start and stop, and for you to have control over which very specific part of your work sample that they get to hear. So you're putting your best foot forward, as it were. So that's first and foremost of importance, that you include those cue times. You'll notice that Queen Drea provides some social and historical context for this work sample. Again, she addresses her sort of raw materials and creative process in the long paragraph here. And one note, as is alluded to in the third paragraph, is that Queen Drea has included an alternative to a score for her additional materials. You will have the opportunity to include a score if a notated score is part of your practice, and that is not required. It does not need to be. But there are alternatives that you can submit. In this case, Queen Drea has submitted an audio-only track that includes some of the bits and pieces, some of the raw audio materials that she has used to create the work sample itself that we just watched. Okay. Next. Mary Ellen Childs is a 2022 McKnight Fellow and a composer who is interested in all the senses. And I base my work in real experiences and visceral phenomena: time, temperature, movement, light, sound. Here's Mary Ellen's artist statement, and as with Queen Drea, I'll give you a minute to read through it, and then we'll talk about some key points. Okay, so a few key elements of Mary Ellen Child's artistic statement. Some are similar to Queen Drea's and some different. So she begins with an overview of her aesthetics and interests, talking about the kinds of instruments she uses and the non-traditional ways that she uses them, and different ways she engages the senses. In the second paragraph, she gives some information about her artistic background and also the development of her artistic identity over time. She's included example of her current work, this super cool piece coming out of experiences aboard an Arctic-bound sailing vessel. She paints a very vivid and interesting image behind this current work that she's working on. And finally, she talks about her developing interests and planned future works. So again, like Queen Drea, Mary Ellen Childs has sort of drawn a narrative for us, told a story about the history of her music creation, how she began, the kinds of music making that she's explored, where she's at now, and things that she's curious about for the future. All of this gives a picture for the panelists about her as an artist, and then again more context for her work samples. This is Mary Ellen's first work sample and written description. Again, I'll give you a moment here to read the description, and then we will have a listen and a chat about the key points. Okay, so let's have a listen to Ephemeral Geometry Points and Lines. Okay, so a few things about this, the written description that accompanies the work sample. So again, under the title, we've got really clear start and end times. Note that the second one is less than 5 minutes. That is fine. 5 minutes is the max for work samples, but it just needs to be under 5 minutes. You'll also notice that there is a round 1 start and end time and a round 2 start and end time. You can use the same work sample and the same composition for multiple rounds of conversation. So you may remember that the panelists, after phase 1, the individual review, get together in phase 2 to listen to the music all together in real time, and that within phase 2 there are 2 rounds. So you can, again, indicate different sections of the same piece to be listened to in different rounds if you like. Hitting the main points here. Again, we have an overview or a context rather of the work's creation in the first paragraph. There's some extra musical or beyond musical inspiration included there in the second paragraph when she talks about these photos in the EPA Documentaria collection and her personal connection to those photographs and some real vivid imagery about what was included in those photographs so that the panelists too can feel a connection between the composer's inspiration and the music they are listening to. She also was very explicit about why she included this example and how it relates to her aesthetics and to her larger body of work there in that last paragraph, to show her interest in textures and layered lines, etc. You'll note here that in her supporting materials, she has included a score notated in Western classical notation, and that certainly is an option if that is the medium that you work in. Okay, let's keep going. Mary Prescott was a 2021 McKnight Fellow. She says, I am a Thai-American interdisciplinary artist, composer, and pianist based in Minneapolis and New York City, who explores the foundations and facets of identity and social conditions through experiential performance. Again, I'll give you a moment to read this on your own time, and then we'll talk about the key points. Okay. So, a few key points. Mary Prescott leads with a background regarding her cultural identity, to which the rest of the statement relates directly. She talks about, in the second paragraph, some social issues and explorations related to her work overall. Like the previous fellows that we looked at, she offers some background, artistic background, and information about the development of her artistic identity over time, and then discusses how the concepts explored in her work relate specifically to her identity as she says, an Asian American woman living in a patriarchal society. And then finally, she closes her statement with current and future developments in process. So again, there's highly individualized information, a sense of storytelling or narrative about what she is interested in aesthetically, what she is interested in socially, the ideas, stories, and questions that she is exploring, and then what she's working on right now and where she sees her work going. Okay, so this time we're going to listen to the third work sample that Mary submitted, and I'll explain why we're doing the third one and not the first one. I'll give you a moment once again to read the description here, and then we'll have ourselves a watch and a listen. Go for it. Okay. What we're going to watch now is just the first portion she talks about, RIP. Just for the sake of time, we'll only listen to that one. So here we go. Okay. So we've included, or I've included work sample 3 instead of 1 here, to give an example of how a successful applicant offered contrast to the first work example. So her first work example was a solo piano piece. The second work example was for piano and voice. And as you can see here, this is has a staged element too, and of course the use of very different materials and the ripping of the fabric. So it stands in great contrast to the other work samples that Mary submitted. In this case, for RIP, she has included a score with conventional Western notation, but you'll note that in the work description at the end, she says there is no written score for rapping. Instructions for this song were delivered verbally to performers. So this is, again, by way of saying that the word score can mean what it needs to mean for your aesthetic practice. Again, cue times are offered. Those are critical for work for reasons we've already discussed. She provides a context for the larger work, Songs Between Life and Death, and what that larger work is about. Discusses the musical materials themselves, including the ripping fabric, what this piece represents in her larger body of work, and then finally the note about having no written score for the second selection. So again, this provides context for the piece itself, and also the piece's context or placement in her larger artistic output. Okay. So the last fellow that we're going to visit here is Devon Russell Gray, who was an awardee twice, a 2017 and 23 McKnight Fellow. I wanted to include someone who had been selected as a fellow twice, both to note that it certainly is possible to do so, and if you are a previous fellow, you are still encouraged to apply, and also to make a few points about things to focus on if you are a previous fellow applying. Quotes here are, I've known for an age that it can take an age for a composer to develop. And that's from 2017. I'm now living in a window of time in which my artistic integrity and fear management are steadily being consulted and considered. You'll note as you read his artistic statement that Devon really brings a personal vulnerability to that statement as a context, as a very powerful context for his work. So it's his individual voice, and it really supports the application. So again, I'll give you a moment just to read the artist statement, and then we'll talk about the key points. Okay. So the first sort of broad thing that I want to say is you'll notice that Devon's voice in this artistic statement is very different from the others, and perhaps different from what you might assume needs to go into such a statement. And that's part of what's so powerful for it. You should feel a great amount of agency in putting your voice into the statement. And you can be as pragmatic as you want, as poetic as you want, so long as you feel like your voice is being heard as clearly as possible. So a few more particular notes. As I said, this one is unique on its focus, in its focus on internal questions and reflections as a person and an artist at this moment in his artistic work. There's an extraordinary amount of vulnerability here. He discusses ways of seeing his artistic identity in this moment and notes a specific musical example in the last string quartet mentioned in that second paragraph there. And then moves through the artistic statement from discussion of solo work into collaborative work and talks about his sort of current exploration. So things that are shared with the previous artistic statements we looked at are this sense of narrative and individuality and the sort of description of an artistic journey from works done before, works done now, and curiosities and interest moving forward. Okay, so here's Devon's first work sample from his 2023 fellowship. You'll note here that Devon includes a conventional sort of score of Western notation, as well as some descriptive materials that lead into that. Give you a moment just to read that paragraph before we listen. Okay, here we go. So you'll note that this written description, and this is the description in its entirety, is significantly shorter than those from the other applicants, and that is okay. Your descriptions do not need to be a specific length. There is a word limit that is included in the application platform as you're going through. So you'll be able to see what that word limit is. It's quite generous, but your written descriptions do not need to be of a specific length. You should offer as much or as little material as you feel is appropriate to accompany the work sample itself. Similarly, the additional materials, you should include whatever you feel best supports the sample itself. This is Devon's third work sample, which you will see stands in contrast to the piano piece that we just heard. And here is the written description. I'll give you a second to read it. Again, the description is extraordinarily brief, but does give you a context for the creation of the work. And let's watch a bit. So, as you've seen, Devon's approach is very different in terms of the kinds of materials he includes, and the kinds of written descriptions and artistic statement. And also, there's a really clear contrast between the first work sample and the latter work sample, which gives us a real sense of the breadth and depth of his work. Before we have time for some questions here, just a reminder that the application deadline is Wednesday, December 17th, 2025 at 11:59 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Again, that's just in case you are vacationing in California or Nevada or something, and have midnight in your brain. It's Pacific time, not Central. There is grace period if you start your application before December 17th at 11:59. You will have a 24-hour grace period to submit the application. If you do use this grace period, you must submit the application before December 18th at 11:59 Pacific Standard Time. After this, we will not accept any applications. After tonight, please remember that I am your go-to contact. For any questions you may have, don't hesitate to email me. And my email address will also be on the ACF website. We can chat by email. We can set up a time to talk by Zoom or whatever works best for you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now. We have a few minutes for any questions if you've got them. And feel free to just unmute. Oh yeah, Marty, go for it.
I apologize, I'm in public, so I don't know if it's noisy in the back. So I had a question yesterday that sort of got answered in this presentation about the work samples. I think it was Mary Prescott. She had as her third like 2 movements from a larger work. And so with the each sample being up to 5 minutes, I'm wondering, I'm guessing you can only put one piece of music in that 5 minutes. Is that not a requirement? But if it's a multi-movement work, that you can do like a little bit of this and a little bit of that from the same work. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
And each sample can be up to 5 minutes.
If you were to include for work sample 1, like some of movement X and some of movement Y from the same piece, the total of those added together needs to be less than 5 minutes.
But between the 3 samples, is it 5 minutes total among the 3 or 15?
15, yeah. 5 minutes for each sample. Sarina?
Hey, so my question, I don't know if this will make total sense. So thank you for your patience. Is this grant more focused on like, I'm going to use this to do this one project in the coming year? Or is it more like, I'm going to use this to continue like the 12 projects I have as a freelance freakazoid? Or is it like, with this grant, I'm going to set aside all my projects that I usually do and pick up this totally new thing that I've never done before? Like, can you help me understand kind of what people are most looking to fund?
Absolutely, yeah. So you can take a deeper dive into the answer to that question if you watch last night's session, because we talked a little bit about that. But
Okay.
Short answer is that the funds are unrestricted and can be used for a huge variety of things. We've had fellows who use the funds for one very specific project. We've had fellows maybe more often will use the funds for a wide variety of things, to buy equipment, to pay other creators, other performers, collaborators, etc., for performances, to pay for recordings, to pay for composition workshops, conferences, career development. The funds are really, truly unrestricted, and you get to do what is most beneficial to you. Yeah, and I wouldn't say that the panelists are looking for one or the other. They're really looking at your past and current work as a creator and the contributions it's made to the community. And then the idea is just to empower you to keep going. Well, while you're considering whether there are any questions left in your brain, I'll just remind you that later this week, the first info session and this one, editing out our technical difficulties experienced early on, will be posted on ACF's website, so you can feel free to go back through those. Really don't hesitate to reach out to me at bdowdy@composersforum.org with any questions you might have. Like I said, we can talk via email or in real time over Zoom if that works better for you, whatever you need. We're here to support. Any parting questions before we close up? Yeah.
So I'm like mostly a community-based composer. So a lot of sort of context for my work kind of is informed by the communities that I work with. And I wonder, just in the samples that you went through tonight, which was all super helpful, there's not so much like this is, I don't know, commentary from people that I work with or impact from, like, how do you feel like the panelists could get a sense of that from outside of the individual artist's voice, or is that not so much what you're looking for?
Sure. That's a great question. So there are some sort of flexible fields in the application in the platform's called Slide where you can upload either links to other materials or you can upload PDFs, etc. And I think it's totally fine if you want to include accounts of your work with these communities or testimonials, for lack of a better word, from community members that you've worked with. Maybe there's material that otherwise documents the work that's done that isn't necessarily a work sample per se. You've got quite a bit of flexibility there to find whatever way makes the most sense to demonstrating the application those experiences and the impacts they've had. Does that answer your question? Great. Yeah. And impact on the Minnesota communities and the sort of artistic ecosystem is a big part of the evaluation. So by all means, put that forward. Last call for now. Last call for now, because you can always reach out to me. Great. Well, thank you for attending this evening. Thank you for your patience with that brief technical mishap. And if you're watching this after the fact, nothing happened. It was just as smooth as it looks like in this recording. All right. Thanks y'all very much. And I look forward to talking to you sometime soon and receiving your applications. Peace.